up? It's your girl Blake. Welcome to episode 3 of Couch Conversations with Blake. Today is the last day of Black History Month and I just had to get this out. I had to do a Black History Month episode before this month ended because I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the history of my people, right? I'm even wearing a little brown for my colored people. Yes, gotta represent always. So today's topic is redlining. I want to talk about housing disparities, how they started and how they currently affect us today, right? I do have my laptop. I need to refer to my notes because I'll just ramble. If I don't have notes to keep me structured, I will ramble. But we're gonna get straight into it. So what is redlining? Redlining is basically when one is refused a loan or mortgage insurance based on their race, right? So it's discriminatory lending practices. Back in 1930s, redlining was created after the formation of the New Deal. Let's go back. So the New Deal, what is the New Deal? So in 1929, the Great Depression started. The Great Depression lasted for about a decade. So until like 1939, 1940. And during that time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, became president. And in 1933, he enacted the New Deal. And it was basically a thing of policies. I'm no historian. I'm just interested in this topic, so I did my research and now I'm reporting it. If you know more than me on this topic, don't shoot me. I'm just the messenger, okay? But anyway, so FDR created the New Deal, which was a form of policies enacted between like 1933 and 1938 in order to revitalize the economy because during the Great Depression, no homes were being built, businesses weren't thriving. It was literally what the name is, the Great Depression. The economy was depressed, okay? So during this time, FDR enacted the New Deal. So let me refer back to my notes before I get off track and start rambling. So redlining, I have the definition, the textbook definition. So redlining is the practice of denying people access to credit because of where they live, even if they are personally qualified for loans. Because of where they live, even if they are personally qualified for loans. So you're telling me, even if I am qualified, because of where I live, I can't get that loan? And you placed me in this box? So let's go over the redlining maps. Each community had a map, right? Each metropolitan area had a map. And each map was color-coded. So you had green, blue, yellow, and red. Hence the term redlining. Green was for corporate people, corporate businessmen, white men. You know, you have your white-collar workers. Blue is for your blue-collar workers, still white. And yellow, that's where it gets a little, risky for lenders. They don't know if they want to, lend people those loans that lived in the yellow areas. Mind you, the federal government created these, or local municipalities created these, but the federal government created policies to enforce whatever maps the local municipalities were creating. So the red areas were predominantly African American communities, and those were the red line areas. And the red areas were denied loans based on where they lived, which was based on their race. So African Americans did not have the same opportunity as whites from the beginning. Okay, so we're in the 1930s. Mind you, we're still in the Great Depression. The New Deal is being enacted during the Great Depression. What is the New Deal? This is the definition, the proper definition. The New Deal is a series of programs, public work projects, financial reforms, and regulations enacted by FDR in the United States between 1933 and 1938. It was a way that people could really start buying their own homes. White people, not black people, whites. Let's keep that in mind. So it started giving out a new loan the middle class Americans could afford. White people moved up to middle class through home ownership. This didn't apply to black people. So white people climbed the ladder through home ownership. And even today, we look and anybody that is rich, ask any rich person. They own real estate. All rich people own real estate, own some type of real estate. Real estate has something to do with their wealth. Just ask somebody. They own real estate. So this is not only affecting blacks in regard to having a place to live, but it's affecting their generational wealth. Let me continue. Housing projects were built mainly for working class white people. They were given monetary incentives to live in these places. Okay, so I won't go into too much detail, but from my research, I found out that the projects were mainly built to give homes to working class whites. And eventually, there were a lot of vacancies in these projects from the whites. The vacancies, the timeline, I'm not sure of like when the vacancies happened, or can't go into detail. But, so there were vacancies in the projects from the whites. Meanwhile, there was a waiting list for blacks to get into homes. So they started putting these black African Americans into the housing projects that they had built for the whites and moving the whites out to the suburbs, right? So yeah, eventually whites moved to the suburbs. So mind you, we coming from the 1930s to now we're in the 1940s, mid-1940s. White flight was mainly after World War II, which ended, I believe, in 1945. So mid-1940s, whites began to flee to the suburbs, and they were given incentives, they were given lower mortgage rates, and it was actually cheaper for them to buy a house than to pay rent. Like these are the incentives that they were given to start their home ownership journey from the federal government. The government implemented these policies for them. So from about 1933 to 1962, out of all of the underwritten loans, out of all of the mortgages given out to people, only 2% were given to black people. Let me repeat that. From about 1933 to 1962, only 2% of loans were given to black people to buy homes. 30 years. That's 30 years that they have on us in regard to building wealth through equity, through home ownership. And that's just the minimum amount of years, because it's not like we got back on our feet. So they still have let's just round it up to 50, because 30 to 50, it's crazy when you think about it. It really is. It's crazy, that the government, it's not crazy because this is America, but it's just crazy to think that we really have these governing policies that are unequal, unfair. They just don't make sense. And if you say that they make sense, try being on the other side. If you're white and you say that they make sense, try being on the other side. If you're black and you say that they make sense, make it make sense. Let me know how. Because your ancestors had to endure this. Anyway. Okay, so when these white people lived in these homes, they could not resell them to blacks, right? Not because, they didn't want to or anything. No, there were restrictive covenants. Restrictive covenants specifically state in a home's deed, this home is to not be resold to a non-white person. So any African American or any person of color, this home cannot be sold to a non-white person. And let's say if a person did try to sell their home to a non-white person, which some people did, because everybody isn't gonna comply with the law. So some people did sell their home to African Americans. they were jailed. They were reprimanded. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, you sold your home to a black person, oh, it's okay. No, because what happens is when you sell your home to a black person, they deemed the community value to be lower. They thought that if a black person or if a black family moved into the community, the property value would decrease. Therefore, the value of the surrounding homes would decrease as well, just because of their race. When in all actuality, because blacks were denied the same rights as whites, they were used to paying more. Therefore, for that same home that cost a white person $20,000 with a 2% interest rate, a black person would pay double, so $40,000 with, a 3% interest rate, which will ultimately raise the value of the home, and it should raise the value of the community. But because of their race, the values were deemed to decrease. When some communities did allow, not all communities allowed black people to purchase homes in their community, but when some communities did allow black people to eventually purchase homes, like let's say the late 1950s, early 1960s, blacks were still discriminated against in their own home. So sometimes like they would get crosses burned on their lawn, or whites would protest, on their lawn, or various discriminatory practices. Blacks who did do that, they just had to endure a lot during that time just to own a home, Okay, so during this time as well, there was a lot of block busting. Block busting, let's just break it down. It's when you bust the block, okay? Let's say a real estate agent knocks on a white person's door. Knock, knock, knock. Hi, yes. I hear a lot of black people, or a black family is moving. It could just be one. A black family is moving into the neighborhood. The white person, oh my goodness, oh, I have to get out of here. And the white people will eventually flee if they hear, a black person is moving into the neighborhood. When they flee, what do? They sell their home at a lower price. So that agent gets that house for a low price and resells it to a black family at a higher price. All because the white person was scared that the value of their home would be lower because a black family was moving in. The black people that were discriminated against in that manner, they were, I would say, not the lucky black people, but they were given an opportunity that most blacks weren't. Because meanwhile, during this time, a lot of blacks were still in the community that they had been redlined in. And it was hard for them to get out of these communities because after World War II, which ended in the mid-1940s, black people were not given the same job opportunities as whites. They weren't given the same housing opportunities as whites. So now they live in these communities, these rundown communities with barely any income because they don't have jobs. And since the communities are run down, businesses don't want to be in those areas. So now these areas are just not thriving, right? And we still see this today. You have food deserts. People don't have access to health care. And now the lifespans of African Americans may not be as long as white people due to racial disparities, racism, and segregation. When you think about housing, it's not just about the home, it's about the lifestyle. It's about the community. It's about the economy. If the value of the homes are bad, okay, we're gonna get there. Okay, so the underwriting manual, it was like these policies were explicitly stated. It wasn't like, oh, let's keep it a secret, let's hide it. oh my goodness, we don't want them to know that we're discriminating against them. Like, let's just act like things are peaches and cream and we're going to afford them the same opportunities. But then on the back end say, oh, gotcha. No, it was like, no, you're not going to be getting this opportunity. You can't have this. No, I'm not going for it. That's what the lenders and the insurance people were saying. Like, no, you're not getting what they're getting. And we're not sorry. Not at all. Not one bit. Remember when I said the Federal Housing Administration was created in 1934? Yes, so they had an underwriting manual. And an underwriting manual is basically like a lender's manual, like the lending book, okay? So this explicitly said, incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. Who deemed these racial groups incompatible in the first place? Who deemed it? Right, exactly. Just making stuff up. I swear, American history is just crazy. We just made stuff up as we went. If it was gonna be like this, I don't know if I would have been born. I don't think I asked to be here. Cause who said that we would be incompatible? How you know we're not compatible? These days, you know, people, I would say today, we are more segregated than we were before because we have the opportunity to integrate and yet we're still segregated. But that's just history showing itself, right? But there are some areas that are more integrated, you know, than they were before. And I would definitely say that the integrated areas, they look fine to me. Look like the racial groups are compatible to me. It all depends on personality and who you vibe with once you get past race, right? But I digress. Let's continue. Okay, so now we're going to go into the Housing Act of 1866. So the Housing Act of 1866, from Google, it says that it prohibits discrimination in housing because of race and color. But we know that that wasn't enacted. So 102 years later, in 1968, we now have the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which prohibited discrimination in the buying and selling of property. Therefore, those restrictive covenants that were in the deeds, in the contracts, not allowing for a homeowner to sell to an African American, that was no longer permitted. Now, each individual could sell or buy a home at their own discretion. Oh, another thing I learned. So housing projects. Okay, so housing projects came about in the 1930s, and they were restrictive, highly regulated, enforced racial segregation, so they meant to split blacks and whites, and they prohibited single parents. I thought that was ironic because now, I know the Housing and Urban Development Program was developed in 1965, and housing projects have been switched since when they were first built. Like, their purpose has changed. But now they have programs for single mothers with children. And I think that just perpetuates the stigma of Black females, particularly because of, see, now I'm going on a tangent, but I'm going to continue my sentence. Particularly because of, you know, policing, the separation of Black families, taking Black men away from their families. So once you do all that and then you provide housing and incentives for single mothers, which happen to be mainly African American women, for them to say that when housing projects were first created, they prohibited single parents is kind of funny, and it's very ironic because now where they place those single parents are basically in housing projects, and they receive assistance from the government. So, yeah, that's wild. Talk about the irony. Now, let's talk about today's impacts. Oh, I know I'm all over the place, but did y'all know that before the New Deal, people could get mortgages for, I think, like 5 to 10 year mortgages, or like 2 to 5 year mortgages, something short. But now they have, once the New Deal was enacted, they did 15 and 30 year mortgages to give white people the opportunity to put less down on a home and just pay it off over a longer period of time. That was one of the incentives. Okay, so for today's impacts. Okay, so as we all know, home ownership is one of the sources to build wealth, right? And if you were denied that opportunity, you obviously started at a later date. I won't say you can't build wealth, because as we see, Black people do own homes today. It's 2024. Black people do own homes today, but white people definitely got a head start at building generational wealth. And with the equity in these homes, they were able to not only send their kids to college, they were able to fund other things for their families, buy more homes, buy more real estate, start businesses, just from the money that they got from being able to own a home, right? They're able to put themselves in different communities with more resources. So now Black people, not only were they denied the opportunity to own a home, they were denied job opportunities. They were denied educational opportunities. Because I'm not sure if you know, but schools are funded from property taxes. And if you have properties with low values, then the schools are going to be underfunded. They won't have the resources that other schools have, right? When we talk about underfunded schools, we talk about, this could be a topic within itself, but I'm just going to hit on it really quick. We talk about crowded classrooms, no resources. And when we have these things, people either become creative. Shout out to my teachers at underfunded schools. I know it can be hard. People either become creative, or if they don't have the resources, kids tend to act out. And not only because they're going to a school where they don't have the resources and it's hard, but because of their environment, because their mom or their parents are working people trying to put food on the table, they might not have that support at home that they need, right? Okay, that could be a whole different topic, but yeah, just know that property values can play a big part in the local school in the area and the funding. So, okay, another fun fact. So homeowners get a tax deduction for their mortgage at the end of the year. And if you don't own a home, you won't be able to get that deduction to reduce your tax liability. And therefore you will be subject to paying more taxes. Okay, so it reads, today African American incomes on average are about 60% of average white incomes. But African American wealth is about 5% of white wealth. Let's dissect that. It's a wealth gap. Let's get that. It says most middle class families in this country gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. Wow, I wish I had equity in my home. I wish I had as much equity as you had in your home that you bought in 1940. So this enormous difference between a 60% income ratio and a 5% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century. The government did this, just like they did everything else. They put us in these communities. They put crack in these communities. They charge us more for crack than they do for cocaine. They give us subprime loans. Subprime loans are loans at a higher interest rate. loans that they know that people cannot afford. It's like all odds are against us. But as a Black community, I'm proud of us. I'm proud of how resilient we are as a people. Because to think, like, this is only about redlining, but to think about all of the other fights that we've had to fight, all of our other challenges that we've had to face, it's a lot. And we're talking about the 1930s, not even 100 years ago. This has not even been 100 years. And this is history. In history's books, this was yesterday. We're still facing this today. It just looks a little different. We got a little bit of technology and it looks a little different, but it's still going on today. 2008, the crash of 2008, do you want to know why that happened? It's because the banks were giving out subprime loans to poor people. And when people could not pay those loans back, which they knew that they couldn't pay them back when they were giving out those loans because they were at such high interest rates, when people could not pay those loans back, the economy crashed. I think Wells Fargo, as recent as 2015, was doing some type of redlining practice, or they were caught for doing something. I don't know. You got to look into it. But the history is not far removed. It's not removed at all. We're still living in it. Just crazy. It's just crazy to think about. Another thing. So, in 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed. And in this Fair Housing Act, basically it said, okay, African Americans, you're free now to buy homes, right? No more restrictive covenants. You can buy homes without discrimination, blah, blah, blah. But it was an empty promise because those homes are no longer affordable. Those homes that were affordable for the white middle class back in the 1940s, the prices have now doubled. And like I mentioned, those subprime loans, African Americans are afforded these opportunities at a higher price and a higher interest rate. But they've been living in these areas without access to jobs. How are they gonna now get to that place? How? Tell me. Oh my goodness. I know it might be all over the place. My findings might be all over the place. I think I still need to go through my notes and see if I left anything out. But I have been researching for at least the past week and a half, watching videos, listening to podcasts, and I can go down a rabbit hole. You find out about like the New Deal, then you start researching the New Deal. You find out about HUD, created in 1965. You start researching about that. You start researching white flight, and you can literally go on and on and on. And to organize this information, to present it to you, I didn't know how. So I just said, let me just hurry up and get it out because I wanted to get it out today. Today is February 29th. It's the last day of Black History Month, and it is a leap year this year. We only get February 29th once every 4 years. So I wanted to do something on February 29th. And it's 10:05 p.m. Oh my goodness. And I still have to edit this video and release it before midnight. Let's see if I can do it. I know I can do it. I'm gonna do it. Why? Because I'm Black. I can do anything. Oh my goodness. One more thing. Urban renewal. Okay, so urban renewal, when we think of urban renewal, urban means city. So city renewal, you think of beautiful cities, right? No, that's not quite it. So urban renewal was also called Negro removal because it removed African Americans from their communities. And I'm gonna read what urban renewal was, just so I'm not stumbling. It says, urban renewal was typically a program, especially in the 1950s and early 60s, where African American neighborhoods near and adjacent to central cities were demolished in order to build housing for middle-income whites or provide space for hospitals or universities. So they cleaned out these black neighborhoods to build housing for whites or to provide public service buildings or even highways. They say a lot of highways are built right through historical thriving black communities. So many African Americans had to flee and go somewhere else due to urban renewal. Negro removal, AKA. That's crazy. So basically, all in all, my people were denied the right to home ownership and they were forced into these communities. Then when they got into these communities, they didn't receive any type of assistance. Meanwhile, white people received incentives. Yeah, white people received a lot of incentives, monetary incentives and everything, to move into these other communities. I think we see the effects of the policies, but we're living in it, and it doesn't hit us every day. We don't think about it every day, like, oh, I'm over here and this is like this because of this. Oh my goodness, it's so deep, and I'm pretty sure you're picking up what I'm putting down. It's not just about housing. Like, they already had zoning laws and things of that sort before the 1930s, but the 1930s, when the New Deal came around, it enforced those federal policies which shaped how our communities are today. Redlining shaped our current communities. We still have those hoods, those slums, those projects, those ghettos. Those still exist today. Baby, you might as well separate all the ingredients of the cake before we figure out how to reverse this. Unscramble an egg before we figure out how to reverse this. It's crazy. And I'm going to keep saying it. It's crazy. Dang. We going to figure out, I'm going to end up solving a Rubik's Cube before we end up knowing how to reverse this. I said I'm going to end up solving a Rubik's Cube. I don't know how to do no Rubik's Cube. But that might be the closest thing to hope that we get, because somebody out there know how to do a Rubik's Cube. So before we end up solving these deeply embedded racial disparities from history, I don't know. I was listening to a podcast and it said, for example, like, if we were to just forget about racism tomorrow and make everything equal, how long will it take for us to get to really be equal? And it said at least 200 years. When people think of reparations, they think of monetary reparations. No, we need reparations in these policies. We need to reverse some of these policies, these lending practices, the Constitution. It's deep. It's really, really deep. I'm no historian. I'm just interested in these topics. And to think that when I was in school, I hated history. I hated history because I had to take tests and I had to remember all the dates and the stories just did not click. But now that I'm older and I'm living and I'm able to understand more, I'm like, wow, this happened back then and these are the effects of it today. I'm understanding, and history is very interesting to me. Whenever I watch something, I have to watch a documentary. I feel like if I'm just watching a regular movie, I'm being lazy. Like, it's always something to learn, always something that affects us today. And if you're not trying to solve the problem, you're part of the problem. So, yeah. But that is it. Thanks for listening to Couch Conversations with Blake. The episode on redlining. I'm Blake Minter, and that was a lot to digest. I hope you had a great February, a good Black History Month. Tomorrow is March 1st, the beginning of Women's Month, Women's History Month, and I'm gonna put on for all my ladies. We gonna have it good next month, okay? But thank you for tuning in to another Couch Conversation with Blake.